Well, I think out of respect for everybody that has showed up, I think we're gonna get the program started.
Well, this is such a nice intimate group. Where are you from?
Deerfield, Illinois.
You, sir?
Thompson Bay.
Welcome, welcome.
Ellison Bay, sometimes.
Oh, we met. I'm still waiting on my coldest one.
We'll see how the presentations are.
Oh, welcome, welcome. Don't be afraid. Ladies, we all met here, and I'll leave you out just to expedite things. Sir?
Elmwood Park, Illinois.
Welcome, welcome.
Hi. Hello. Elmwood Park.
Welcome. We're here on a very, 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 very special day, other than the ladies, it's solstice today. And it doesn't really matter what part of the world you're from or what heritage you possess. Everybody knows when this day came. From Stonehenge to China, to the southwest, to the northeast, to the Arctic Circle, everyone realizes this is a very special day. So it's my privilege to speak to you today, just because of the sacredness of the moment and the hard work that these people have put into remembering who they were, who they are, and how they got here. And so today, I am here to give you a little bit of native perspective on what's known to you all as Door County. And so I'm about to kick it off. So, Kona Munse, na Joth. Kona Munse ma na Jotak, Kona Munse ma na Jotak. How are all of you? Are you all fine? Are you all well? Good. So, Mawete Tane Niana, Mawe, Anawanek. It's a good day for us to gather. A good day that we're all gathered together. In the long story of this place, at one time it had a glacier on it up to 1 mile deep, they figured. So it's like right out of the Game of Thrones or Thrones or whatever, you know, where there's this impenetrable natural barrier, and we are part of it. And it has scraped this land just as deep and as smooth as this concrete. And if you're a Door County person, or you're here at the right time of year, you can ride around and look at our hay fields and see the cracks in the bedrock, because the alfalfa will be 6-8 inch hires, and then the rest of the field will be struggling to grow. Because on many of these farms, and especially up here and on the Escarpment, there's many times less than 3 inches of dirt. Some of your fields are showing that bedrock. The earth, as deep as that monster could plow, it had to stop here. And so, in that time of history, people have came and people have gone, and full societies that, don't take any offense, most white people don't even realize existed. You know, we had a copper culture here. The copper from here is in graves in Miami. It's in graves in Yellowstone. It's in graves on the Gulf Coast. So, that vibrant trade network also put conch shells in Menominee graves over across the bay. It put a Sibian from Wyoming in graves in Wisconsin. Well, this stuff doesn't get here without hand carriage, you know what I mean? And the people in Wisconsin, for the most part, traveled by water. And with our intricate water systems, people built whole societies on that. In the Mississippi, at one point had a civilization down in a town called Cahokia. When London and Paris were pig farmers struggling to survive with rutabagas, Cahokia had museums and libraries and zoos and plazas and sporting fields. And it's still there today if you ever care to go visit it. We live in Wisconsin, the most mounds of any state in America, stretching from Ohio to La Grande, Iowa. Now that society was big and bold. You're familiar with those serpents you can only see from the air, and the birds and the bears. You know, this wasn't a dead land by any means or needed to be discovered. You know what I mean? This was a thriving, living place for many, many decades, eons. And people have come and people have gone. But mostly today, I'm going to talk about the era when the French came. And then it was written down and people could believe it. You know what I mean? So the 1600s, the French, the Jesuits, the Army of Jesus, they were well established to our east. Montreal, Ottawa, all along Detroit, all along that river going to the ocean. And those Army of Jesus, they came in those big birch bark canoes, and they followed the lakes, and they came and they ended up in Door County. Nicolay, Radisson, you've heard those names, you know who I'm talking about. And they met the people that were living all along here, all in that northeastern Wisconsin, because water was your airport, your interstate, your road of any kind in this forested biome that just didn't let you ride up. When white men first came to Virginia, they could gallop a horse through the forest because those people that lived there maintained the forest so that they had a place for cropland. Here, until recently, everybody was an acorn picker and a deer killer. And now, with the help of underground radar, stuff like that, they're realizing there are gardens that were big enough to feed 10,000, 15,000 people. That's not in anybody's lexicon when they're talking about woodland Indians. Oh, they live in small groups, and they live here, and they live there. But there was a time in this state, and they're just discovering them in Michigan, these massive farmlands, fed and fertilized by biochar, classic slash and burn stuff. And people lived here, and lived here a long, long time. So after the French came, they came down the lake shores. Washington's Island, Ottawa Island. The Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Odawa are basically one people, a three-fire society. The Odawa, that word means trader, T-R-A-D-E-R. They're the people of trade, but they're also that outer wing of protection, and they're known as the people, the Marten people, a fierce forest animal that lives in the treetops, pine marten, aggressive, you know, it represented who they were. The next circle of that target is the Ojibwe people, and they're known as the keepers of the faith. And they hold all those spiritual stories and traditions that many of us have heard of us. Some of them personally, in my elderness, I made a decision to be a traditional man. Indian men didn't always have that tradition because, as me and the ladies were talking earlier, we weren't allowed to sing and dance or practice religious ceremonies till 1978. By then I was 4 years out of school. I was indoctrinated, raised a Catholic, because my mother, who attended the boarding school, it was a Catholic boarding school. Each reservation was afforded a religion, you know. These guys are Presbyterian, these guys are Lutheran, these guys are Catholic. And I mean, if this is the Menominee reservation, they made sure if it was Catholic, then the Mohican reservation right here is gonna be Protestant, because it's all the way back to divide and conquer. It never stops. And if you're an Indian, you never stop looking over your back at the government, because they're always in your life. They're telling you who. If your father is 100% Menominee, and your mother is 50% Oneida, and in the traditions you follow your mother, you're only 50% Indian. You can't be 150%, you can't be 100%, because of your obligations to your mother. Now you're half an Indian, even though your biological bloodline is all the way, you know. And so we face those kind of things that came into this country, and prior to that, you're standing on Menominee land. Menominees, Menominee, all of it, all the way over to where the Dakotas pushed in the Sioux, commonly known as Sioux. The Dakota people, they were in like Crandon and over in that wild rice country. And if you ever go over in that country, once the Ojibways followed their dream back home, that was wild warfare over there, over rice. Because the Ojibwe, they were called to come back here to find the water that will feed you, the food on the water. Personally, I know there's wild rice on the north end of Kangaroo Lake when you go across the causeway. Look out at all that weedy stuff, that's wild rice out there growing. And it was a mainstay of this region. And being that the Ojibways brought the Catholics here, they told the Catholics who everybody was. When they met the, what they call themselves Ho-Chunk, the Ojibwe said to the Catholic, he said, these are the bad water people. And the French came here, and they got down there by Dykesville, and they named that body of water Bay La Punt, Stink Bay. And as a kind of an Indian joke, we still call it that, because you can smell the paper mills and stuff when you go there, you know. But that was its original French name, Stink Bay. And so as they come down, they met these people. Well, here's the bad water people. Took them down the Fox Valley River to Lake Winnebago, place of the bad water people. Because in the summertime, stagnant, people are hanging and drying fish like crazy. You know you're pulling up on some stink. And so this area, you know, it had many different people on it. The Fox Sauk, have you ever heard of those? That's what the Fox River is named after. Not the pretty little red animal, the sconsuisse, but these people, the Fox. They didn't like the French. They liked the British. Anybody could live here. The Menominees had a policy called a Painon a Kihi. Come and sit upon my land. There's too much food. There's too much everything. I got no reason to fight with you. Behave yourself. If you don't behave yourself, then you become a place called Winneconne. Heads on spears. Because the Fox, they were gangsters. If you look at the old pictures, you know, when there's treaties, here's a Menominee, maybe he's got a blanket and a feather. Here's a Ojibwe guy, maybe he's got a blanket and a feather, you know what I mean. But when the Fox came to town, man, their hair was roached up. They're hanging every piece of trinketry and jewelry they could get from a trade somewhere. They each had their picture painted with the club that's going to take your life if I don't like the way you're looking at me. And that's just how they ran their show. And that didn't set well with the Menominees, and they had to be corrected, which resulted in the French later on having Demort, like Butemort, the Hill of Death, because we're tired of these guys, we're getting rid of them. And that's how that, history in Wisconsin, moving and changing all the time. White guys, the real white guys, hadn't even got here yet. Because nobody trusts the Frenchman, right? Frenchman was the enemy of any Anglo, any white European. The French were, they might talk fancy, but otherwise, no. In Oconto, there is a French town. In Jacksonport, many of them people were French, the fishermen people that lived there. But they didn't just roll with the Long Knives, who are Americans, or the British. They didn't roll with those guys very well. And the other people, their other branch, the Sauk, that literally means people of the yellow earth. The sandy dunes down by Milwaukee, all of that stuff, that's who they were. Them Sauk people, Sauk Fox. And in Wisconsin, Wisconsin is built on political moves from the government. And I know you guys are thinking, who is this weirdo? But this is just history and how it works, Now, on the East Coast, my people come from the Hudson River Valley. I'm Mo'ikanewe Nenepa, Mohican man. And my people were on the Andrew $20 bill, get out of town guy, And the rules established by the East Coast colonies was the fact of, we know the French got a place called St. Louis out there somewhere. So Connecticut's going to run from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi. Yeah, good idea. That's how we're going to have it. Massachusetts said, what an outstanding idea. We've got law, we've got civilization. So Wisconsin, originally, not very often talked about, is part of those 13 original colonies because they just ran their borders to infinity, which also ran their laws to infinity. So when Andrew's pushing everybody west, Connecticut law says New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, the bottom of Wisconsin, and Illinois, it is cheaper and better to club an Indian to death than to waste shot and powder. And so that was the law for all these people being pushed west. They had to walk through these zones of militias that said, the law says, you guys might be in this church having a service, because people took Christianity as a protection. They took it as a shield, you know what I mean? Hey, we don't want to make war with you guys, but, we're going to move like the president asked us, but, them laws were in effect. So I spoke a couple years ago at a place called Runhatten, Ohio. And those were what people want to refer to now as Christian Indians moving west on the president's command. And they got there, and some Pennsylvania militiamen, because there wasn't really a Pennsylvania or an Ohio, you know what I mean? This was territory. And as far as Connecticut was concerned, it's our laws apply. And 91 souls were killed in this church, and then the church burned down upon them. And it's still a stain on Ohio history, and they realize it now. But it was just the attitude back then, You're dealing with subhumans. Crack them in the head, move on. Don't worry about it. You're not violating any Bible precept or, hey, this is just the way it was. So all these people are on a march from all over. Our people were come here to Wisconsin. And now, in my elder state, I realize that the Oneida, the Mohican, and the Brothertown are the only 3 Indian tribes that chose the Long Knives in the Revolutionary War. Everybody else stayed with their father. Britain is the great father here, blah, blah, blah. The French, they were above the St. Lawrence, you know what I mean? And Britain kept them there, because them two, they're just like siblings. They could never quit fighting over something. So why not bring it to America? You know, I mean, they each had a formula, and their formula worked. In Britain, the sun never set on the British Empire, and it was a literal truth. From Melanesia all the way back around to the east coast of America, you know, British Empire. And so all of this stuff is changing and turning, where for the eons I talked about earlier, that's pretty static, you know. I know the Sioux live over there. Let them. I don't want to deal with them, you know what I mean? I know these people are coming from the east, but we're Algonquins, so somewhere in our lingo, we're talking the same language, you know. What do we need to kill about? You know, let's come to consensus. And the people that came here were always looking for the king. Who's king? Who's the king here? I got to talk to the king. Well, there was no king. Consensus. We all had to live together to survive, so we all had to agree on what we were going to do. And that meant mothers standing up in lodges and saying, my children don't need to die over this foolishness. And women carried as much weight and as much clout as a man did. Not happening here in the Euro world. Women were property, you know, certainly didn't have any say. We're here, in my tribe particularly, we were matriarchal. And so the women were it. They were leaders. If you came home and your moccasins are laying outside the lodge, better go visit your cousin because you're out, you know. There was none of this I own. And so that's a whole different concept of life. Crashing into a style of life that's built on, damn it, if you got it, I'm taking it because this is something I need. And then they do it with whole races of people. And it worked. It worked. So by the time they were getting here, this established land base, this community of giving, you know what I mean? You can live there. I'm not eating there. You know, I'm over here. They're smart enough to, it was a way of life here. And so Door County was one of the first things that the government went after. They told the Menominee, you beware of those New York Indians. You beware of all of them. Now, didn't we just fight the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 for you? And they come here and they tell all of the wild Indians, watch out for them ones. They're no good. They're going to take everything you got. And we fought like white men by now. We come in, we burned your houses to the ground in the middle of the night. We burned your corn. We violated your women, took your children. That's how war was waged now, since we learned the Euro way. And the proof in that lies in a guy named Blackhawk. Illinois visitors, you've heard of him? He wasn't a hockey team. He was a real guy. And he came home and found his gardens and his place he grew and lived occupied. People are raising stuff. Hey, you wouldn't believe how good this garden is. Well, it's been a garden for about 300 years. Of course, it's the place to raise stuff. So the British, up in Canada, they're laying up there like a big cougar, tail switching, you know. How do we get British North America back? And they told Blackhawk, he was Fox Sock, he loved the British deep in here, they were always his, you know. They said, meet us in Milwaukee, we'll drive all of them white folks out of that state, and it'll be home, you're home again. And when he got to Milwaukee, of course, there was nobody, the British were supposed to come from Canada in boats and drive back, they never showed. So he made that desperate run for the Mississippi River. They didn't quite make it, they got beat up pretty heavy, but they still exist. in Tama, Iowa. They call themselves the Meskwaki now. And there's their reservation there. But in that thing, every turn in the road, you know, there was that kind of disappointment. They brought those other 3 tribes here as a veiled threat to those wild Indians, you know. Look who we got here now, you know. Don't trust them, but they're ours. So the first thing they weaseled out of any contract of Wisconsin was the Door Peninsula down to Chicago, the onion fields. They took the whole lakeshore. Because again, airport, highway, shipping, you know what I mean? It was everything. And then they started counseling the Menominees. Don't trust those guys, don't deal with them. They're here to take your land, you know. And time goes on, and by the 1850s, we're not gonna live here no more. The government's done with us, we're going to Kansas. We sent runners to Kansas and they said, ain't no water, you can even see the rock in the bottom of the creek. The tree is over there. We're woodland people, we're from places of clean water and big tree biome, you know. And we said, then we'll die here then, I guess. And they told the Menominees, you know what, we really ain't got a lot of use for you guys anymore. You're going to Minnesota. But there was a guy who Wisconsin City's named after, Chief Oshkosh. And he said, I will not give you 5 acres of Menominee land, which was Wisconsin, for all of Minnesota. You have the whole state go over there and take over. To this day, Wisconsin has more Indian tribes within its borders than any other state east of the Mississippi. And we're proud Indians here. I meet Indians from Montana and stuff, and they go to me, Larry, nothing really ever happened good about being an Indian. And my mom would have slapped my head around like an owl if she heard me talking like that, you know. Because that's the only thing we had. Living here in Door County, we were cherry pickers, migrant workers, you know what I mean. And so by the time I was 9 or 10, you know, I'd go to old Woolworths on 3rd Avenue, and there was one cashier there, she loved me. She'd have 5, 6 people. I got $25 a week for working on a farm. That was 2 comic books and 1 piece of candy. My ma hated that. You spent $25 on that? But it taught me how to read. It taught me how to escape depression of being a slave labor farm kid, you know. Standing at an auction with my dad's arm around me, and they're selling the neighbor's barn cleaner. And I'm on him, Dad, 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 Dad. He wrapped his arm around me lovingly and said, I got my barn cleaner, son. You know, I mean, we're coming from that bottom end of everything, you know. And living here was hard. It was hard even in the 70s. You know, our community of people lived all in one little place out in the swamp by Surgeon Bay near Buffalo Ridge Road. And it was always called the Sand Farmer Road because it was orchards, you know what I mean? Everything was orchards back then. And there, this old orchard was all on the dunes that were headed to the lake, because the escarpment ends in my backyard and dives down into the lake, into the muck and the water drainage that lead to the sand dunes to Lake Michigan. And so for a joke, the town board thought, let's call that road Buffalo Ridge. The Indians live there anyway, you know what I mean? You wouldn't even pull that one off nowadays, you know, people be gaping. Why do we care? You know, we got a roof over our head and we're eating. That's what life was about. Pardon me. So, it remained pretty tough to live on this rock, you know, and we scraped out a living. We stayed. We did that stuff like run a junkyard, you know, which your idea of getting out for the week would be get in with your uncle and we'd tour whatever day the dump was open in whatever township, you know. And that's how you got your metals and recycled, and it wasn't called recycling then, it was junking. You were junking, you know. Now with this recycling thing, I can proudly stand up here and tell you, I come from a long line of recyclers, you know. The truth is, we're junkmen, and unless you needed that part for your 54 Plymouth or your wringer washer, you know, probably ain't going to Harold's. And so, this place, it's so rooted so deeply into prehistory, and it continues to draw people to this day. So is it because we're standing right on Mother Earth? You know what I mean? You go over there and stand on the grass in Quincy, Illinois, there's probably 15, 25 feet of black dirt. Here we are standing on the skin of our mother. You know, that pulse is radiating all the time. Sometimes not good. What's radon? It's that pulse of Mother Earth in your basement because you didn't pour cement over that rock, you know. And these ideas of people traveled all the way here to look for wild rice, you know, as a nation. Those Ojibwe people now, they stretch all the way to Western Canada and all the way back to Eastern Canada. And they live right in Michigan for the most part, but the center of their world story was right across the lake in Manitoulin Island. And so that's why Washington Island had those Odawa people on it. That's a short trip around the Horn there, to be over here, good fishing, different land. And so it was never discovered here, you know what I mean? This was land that was always cherished by many generations of people that came and left, and then continued to go on after that shoreline land sale. You know, when the Scandinavians came here, they were just screaming, home! Rocks and pines and water were home. You know, and that's why they're predominantly up on the top of this finger, where it's rocky, where it's rough, and where you gotta know how to deal with that kind of property to survive. In between Gibraltar and Sturgeon Bay, predominantly your Celtic people, your Germans and your Irish, you know. And then by 1848, the Belgians came to the south part of the bay. So this rock continues to draw people, you know, it continues to draw people. If you go to Oconto and you look across the bay, we stick up over the horizon like a mountain. If you look at Oconto on any given day, you know, it dives under the horizon almost. You can see a water tower light, but you know what I mean? We've always been that place. And people would come here in the spring before the canal. All them sturgeon would be at the end of the bay. They would harvest enough fish. And on my Irish side, my great-great-grandfather was the ditch digger at the canal. He lived on a big creek, first guy to blaze a trail out to where the dig was. Otherwise, every day you had to go by rowboat to get to work. And so my family blood has been here a long, long time on both sides. And for me, in my 69th year, I see all this change from when I was 12, 13, 9, 10, because it was a cherry picker world then. You know what I mean? It supplied the world's most tart cherries to the world. And at a certain time of the year, all of these colored people, as they were called back then, when there wasn't more flamboyant names for them, and Mexicans, they'd come from Jamaica, New York, by the busloads. There isn't an Indian reservation in Wisconsin you can go to, and you say, I'm from Sturgeon Bay, and some grandma will walk right up to you and start telling you, you know, that was our getaway. Once a year, we'd get to go up there and pick cherries, and then later in the fall, when school started, Mom and Grandma would go to Door County and pick apples, you know. But I mean, this place always been something special. And we're just starting to realize it again. Because people in their hearts are starting to carry a stewardship for the land. Where previously, when that guy walked over the hump in Massachusetts and looked out there, and some fat guy in Europe is telling you what you owe him, could have been where the finger was invented. I don't know. But, you know, it's only human nature to look out upon what you might consider nothingness, and somebody over here is telling you it's mine. Those people came here, they couldn't even kill a rabbit in their rutabaga patch because it belonged to the king. That might cost you a hand. You know, them Robin Hood guys, and they weren't living outside the law, you know, just for something cool to do. They were living that way because it was oppressive. And they brought some of that oppression here, and the Americans stood up and said, oh, I can have whatever I want, and nobody can tell me otherwise. And so that was the same as the law lines for Connecticut, you know. Oh, it's all mine. This is mine, not you, George, you know. Because this is before states. This is basically colonies and the establishment of Magna Carta courts, you know. And they were making magnum decisions about what was going to happen in this country. And to this day, this is still the land of Nanaman wild rice. And people harvest it, you know, with a religious fervor and treat it like it's a sacrament. And it's also the place of easy living. Wisconsin has always been bountiful. Until recently, we took so much of this for granted, we didn't even realize we are the source of the most fresh water in America. And now people out there in the land of fruit and nuts, in Las Vegas and such, hey, send us that water, would you? Pipeline us out your fresh water. Hey, could be the second time we learned how to raise the finger. No, this is where we live. All these people are coming to the Midwest again because you people are nice. You're nice. You know, go to the East Coast once and borrow a crescent wrench. Yeah. It's going to take you a little while, and a bunch of them are going to be looking at, yeah, what do you want after I open my toolbox? You know, regionally it's nice here, but it's been nice here for eons. You know, this is a place of good people, Milwaukee, that place of that good water. You know, people knew they had it, and they knew all of it had an existence together. Now, as people are discovering the Niagara and Escarpment, they're realizing this is a geological wonderment and not just, couldn't build a house there, too many damn rocks, you know. No. And until just recently in my lifetime, you couldn't build a home there, too many damn rocks, no. Every cherry tree is grafted to the root of a white birch, because that's what knows how to live in this rock. There wouldn't be that cherry industry, there wouldn't be that fruit industry that survived here, except for that wonderment of a tree that belongs here. And we could raise that fruit because that wonderful water kept the frost away in the spring and kept the freeze away in the fall. And it's just them few weeks that make a difference in something like farming, harvesting, you know. Some apples, in fact, like the old favorite that in our generation was the delicious, it needs to have that frost before it ever got the sweetness in it. Otherwise, you know, I'd rather have a Macintosh. So this place graces all of us. It graces all of us with something that we can't put into religious context, political context, whatever context. You know, we are these people now that inhabit it. And like I say, We're nice. We're nice people. And people that come to here, now, I know we're a special case, right? We're sticking out there, we're a calling card. But people are going to Rhinelander, people are going to Wisconsin to just hang. Because you can go somewhere and maybe you can have an argument on Friday night and not get shot. Or maybe you can have an argument on Friday night and get punched in the head and be able to come back Saturday night and have a beer and shake his hand or something, you know. We're just that kind of environment. And so today, as you guys are celebrating this historical, this nice layout, this heritage of Door County, we're doing it in the right way. We're gathering today, sharing our friendship. This is the longest day of the year. If you've never put out kindness before, if you never put out your happiness onto somebody else, today is the day. You know, today is a sacred day all around the world. And you don't have to clutch a book or hold a cross or anything. It's up here. The thankfulness that you were born or can come to or live in the Midwest, you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. And this place is celebrating that. So, I'm going to drop it at that, and and Mohican, that's I'm done talking. And if any of you would have some Q&A, I am more than happy to answer. And people say there aren't any dumb questions, but there are. But I'm man enough to take them, so just anybody?
How do you feel about the casino culture and Indians?
Well, I'll tell you what. If it was a white culture, nobody'd come see us. You know what I mean? It's a retro payment. People just stormed in here, took whatever they want. In Oconto, in my buddy's grandpa's generation, so that'd be somewhere just before the 20s, anytime 3 Menominee Indian males were out alone, they could be shot at.
Really?
So, yes. Because that was considered a war party, even if they were just going to O'Connell to get flour and, you know what I mean? So, times are changing. Most of my life, people want to call me the N-word, you know, because that was the going thing, you know. Nobody knew much about Indians. What are they, you know? In 60-ish, one day the Menominees woke up and they weren't Indians anymore because they followed the precepts of do as we say, and they had a logging industry. They had a super sawmill, more automated than any sawmills anywhere, because they were trying to stay on top of feeding a whole nation. Not one man's ego, you know, not one family's belly, but a whole nation. And it's still going on today. MTI, it's called. They have made the floors for the NCAA match finals. They have made that flooring every year for years. But they had hospitals, they had schools, they had an electric company, they had it going on. And the day they weren't Indians anymore, they had nothing. And now, it's a recovering third world nation with an overall, and this is a third eye looking at it, and this is, if somebody says, who told you that? You just tell them, the old fat bastard said it right in Ellison Bay. But there's an expectation of failure. It wasn't going to work out anyway. Dude, you got 20 minutes to finish your college, education, and it's wing night, and because it ain't going to work out, you're not even going to try. And it's going on, it's going on other reservations, but not many in Wisconsin because of gaming. We have Head Start now. I never went to kindergarten. We have food programs for the elderly. And whatever the government pitch it is, You know what I mean? The people support most of this from their own reservation. And so, casinos out west, where you can gamble at the gas station or at the grocery store, guys come by and threw rocks through the windows. Brand new buildings just destroyed because ain't nobody gonna spend their money on a redskin. Here we have that luxury of owning the gambling compact. And it has brought children up to the age to be ready to go to school, to be able to count, read, you know what I mean? Gambling here is a wonderful thing, and it put me through college at the age of 54. So now all of a sudden at 54, I can understand there was more to my mom's story than, oh, one night in the barracks, John Dillinger ran through and the feds were chasing him. Because prior to that Roaring '20s stuff, there was no law on a reservation if you didn't have law. Government didn't want nothing to do with you. You were considered a ward of the government, and to anybody sitting in those grand halls in Washington, that equates expense. You know what I mean? Luckily, this is just how fickle this world is. Richard Nixon, everybody's villain, you know, in history kind of thing, he had an Indian roommate in college, and he got up one day and said, wow, what's wrong? What? Menominee? They're Indians again. You know, after everything's in the crapper, nothing's left. The hospitals are gone. The electric companies are gone. You know what I mean? The only existing entity was MTI. And it was there because a long time ago, Chief Oshkosh said, the only way we're going to remain on this confined space is we start at Waupun, which is where the sun comes up, and we log all the way to Andy Pate, where the sun goes down. And that's what they do, and by the time they get to Andy Pate, they can start at Waupun again and work their way back, you know what I mean? And they made a listing, a place in this world with that kind of old world thinking. And so, at this point, we're going to see where it all goes, you know. But gambling has been a boon for us. Anybody? Oh, you.
Are those young eagle feathers in your fan, or?
No, this is my fan.
Yeah.
This is a golden eagle, but this is not a wing of an eagle. This is right here. Just those fingers at the end of the wing that catch and spread, and you know what I mean. And I carry it when I'm dancing, of course, but I also carry it when I'm speaking to people, because along with the feather on my hat, it's a guarantee of trying to speak the truth, trying to speak honesty. And you know, for all of you in Indian country, this is a blessing, you know. If you see a particularly hot dancer, you fan his feet, you know. And so, this is made out of porcupine quills. This is Menominee porcupine quill art. And take them quills and you pull them through your teeth to flatten them, and then you dye them and you interweave them, because they're flat squares, you know, now tubes, instead of that round porcupine quill. And so that predated any beadwork or trade beads from the French and stuff. And these bear claws are for all the bears that I killed in my life, because I grew up a farm kid, and I was addicted to hound dogs. And so I spent most of my adult life weaving what I do for a living around what I do for a calling. And that's treating bears with hound dogs. And so I've probably seen 500 bears in a tree in my life. I never, no way to kill that many. So I don't kill cubs, I don't kill sows. And sows, when they're milking, are endowed like a woman. You can look up there, oh yeah. You know, so we'd only kill boars. And we chased bears in Wisconsin, Michigan, Canada, Maine, and Massachusetts, you know. And then one day I woke up and I realized that, dang it, the maple tree was living, but now it's dead. You know, where did that energy go? All my older relatives, I'm already planting my mom's plateau of relatives, you know. I went to like a dozen funerals in 18 months, you know. And about the time you're going, I ain't never going to another funeral again, then your buddy dies or something, you know. But I mean, that's life too. But I realized that spirit was disappearing right around me. And what I had did to a lot of them bears, you know, is before I knew enough to say thank you, before I knew enough to take tobacco and lay it at that kill site and say thank you to the Creator, get you on the do, the Great Spirit, you know. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of eating bear, for taking this bear spirit. Because bears are medicine. They're medicine. You know, they're fat, they're meat, their hide, you know, is all put down there for the Great Spirit for us to use. And we also honor them, you know. They tell us the story of how to take care of your children for an extended amount of time, you know what I mean? How to make sure that you know what to dig for herbs and roots, you know. And man, we might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but we're sharp enough to learn. And we learn this thing from the animals, you know. And so I learned, you know, in my life that I owe a debt to these animals, and so it led me to become a conservation congressman and help steer the rules for bear hunting in Wisconsin, you know, in a proper direction. Because prior, honey, there's a bear by the bird feeder. You go out, you shoot them in the guts a couple times, and let them run off in the woods and die. People in Wisconsin treated the black bear like a skunk. You know what I mean? And it wasn't until after what should we say, ethics became a thing with the black bear. He was unhonored here. But now people, you know, they scour to get a chance. Some wait 8 or 10 years to get a chance to be able to hunt a bear, you know. And along with our brother the wolf, that's something that's got to change too. It's got to be made worth something in the white value system, because right now the standard abbreviation was for wolves is SSS, shoot, shovel, shut up. You know what I mean? So when you get the chance, you shoot them through the guts and let them run off and die. And there's no evidence laying there, you know. So we have wolves here in Door County. You know, we have cougars here in Door County. We have black bears here in Door County. When it was a monoculture, DDT and everything, all that stuff was gone. The stories say we're going to destroy this world. Us current two legs. And out of our demise will rise people that realize they have to honor our earth, honor our giver of life, you know. Well, and other guys are standing on Mars. Hopefully, you know, my great niece or something will be picking blackberries somewhere, hunting for morels, you know, because it's all here for us, and especially here. You know what I mean? Go pick morels in Las Vegas. You know, the wasteland that we call L.A. When they first went to L.A., the Mexicans were there for a couple hundred years, and they were rich rancheros and bountiful life, and citrus made California blast off. It was so fertile. Now, in my humble opinion, it's on the road to desertification. The storms, the burns, the wash away weak soil, once it's burnt and stuff. That's how come the Sahara is the Sahara. They wouldn't be drilling all that oil just a little east of there if that wasn't bountiful, beautiful land at one time. Because it's that vegetable matter that turns into what you're looking for. So, the little time warp we live up here, we should live it in pride. And we're on our way back. The commercial fisherman thing we were talking about with the ladies here earlier, there were no fish left here by the time it was 66. The lakes were fished out. That's why Jacksonport's fishing industry disappeared. That's why Sonny's and Stone Harbor are on the bay in Sturgeon Bay. There wouldn't have been a spot for them with all the fishing tubs they used to wait there, you know. So, everything changes. Hopefully it'll, for at least in my gray haired period, it'll go along nicely, you know. Yep. Pardon? I live in